Nothing is wrong, and that is exactly why your mind starts to panic. There is a strange kind of anxiety that does not come from chaos, pressure, or anything visibly going wrong. It appears when everything is finally quiet, when life becomes stable, predictable, and even peaceful. And instead of relief, something inside you begins to feel uneasy. Not because something is happening, but because nothing is. Most people expect anxiety to come from problems, from stress, uncertainty, conflict, or pressure. But there is another form that shows up in the absence of all of that. It begins when your external world becomes calm, when there is no immediate threat to respond to, and your mind suddenly has nothing obvious to solve. That is when it turns inward, and what it finds does not always feel like peace. At first, it is subtle, almost easy to ignore. A quiet tension in the background, a feeling that something is slightly off, even though you cannot point to anything specific. Then it slowly grows into restlessness, into overthinking, into a kind of discomfort that does not have a clear source, which makes it even harder to understand. The confusing part is that this is the state you thought you wanted, the calm you work toward, the moment where everything finally settles. You expected relief, maybe even clarity, but instead, what you feel is unfamiliar. And unfamiliar, to the mind, often feels unsafe. The human brain is not designed to prioritize happiness or peace. It is designed to prioritize survival, and survival depends on detecting patterns, especially patterns of threat or instability. If your past has been filled with emotional intensity, unpredictability, or constant stimulation, your mind adapts to that environment and begins to treat it as normal. Over time, that state of tension becomes your baseline, not because it is healthy, but because it is familiar and predictable. So when life suddenly becomes calm, your brain does not automatically interpret it as safety. It interprets it as a break in the pattern it has learned to expect. Anything that breaks expectation demands attention. And attention, in the mind, often comes with questioning and scanning. This is why calm can feel uncomfortable. Not because there is something wrong with it, but because it does not match what your system has been trained to recognize as normal. Imagine living in constant noise for a long time, surrounded by movement, stimulation, and sound, until your mind adjusts and learns to function within that environment. Then one day, everything goes quiet, completely silent, and instead of immediate peace, you notice every small detail, every sound, every internal thought, because the silence feels unfamiliar. Calm works the same way, because when external chaos disappears, your attention naturally shifts inward and begins to observe what has been there all along. Thoughts that were ignored, emotions that were postponed, patterns that were never fully examined, all begin to surface simply because there is finally space for them to exist. This is where anxiety starts to build. Not because something new has appeared, but because something old is finally being noticed without distraction. The mind, which prefers clarity and resolution, begins searching for meaning in that discomfort, trying to label it, understand it, and most importantly, fix it. It starts asking questions that seem logical on the surface, like whether something is about to go wrong, whether you are missing something important, or whether this calm is temporary. These questions are not based on reality. They are based on conditioning, a system that has learned to stay alert in order to feel safe. If the mind can find a problem, it knows what to do. It can act, respond, and regain a sense of control. But when everything is calm, there is nothing to solve. And that lack of direction can feel uncomfortable for a system that is used to constant engagement. This is why people begin to create tension without realizing it, overanalyzing neutral situations, questioning stable relationships, or interpreting silence as something negative. Not because they want to feel anxious, but because their mind is trying to return to a state that feels familiar, even if that state is uncomfortable. Familiar discomfort often feels safer than unfamiliar peace, and that is the pattern most people never notice. You are not reacting to what is happening now. You are reacting to what your mind has learned to expect based on past experience. Expectations shape perception in powerful ways, often without you realizing it. And when your baseline has been stress or instability, calm does not register as relief. Instead, it feels like something is missing. Like there should be more happening, more to think about, more to prepare for. The mind does not like that gap, so it fills it, sometimes with worry, sometimes with doubt, and sometimes with imagined scenarios that have no real foundation. This is not a conscious decision. It is an automatic process driven by the need to predict and prepare. This is why you can be sitting in a quiet moment with nothing wrong and still feel uneasy, because the trigger is not external. It is the mismatch between your current environment and the internal patterns your mind is still operating from. Until that mismatch is understood, the cycle continues, and you start looking for something to fix, even when nothing is broken. You check your surroundings, your relationships, your decisions, searching for clarity where there is no confusion, trying to resolve something that does not exist. And in doing that, you create the very tension you are trying to escape, turning calm into something that needs to be managed. This is the paradox. The more you try to eliminate the feeling, the stronger it becomes. Because every attempt to fix it reinforces the idea that something is wrong. Your brain responds to that signal by increasing awareness, becoming more alert, more sensitive, more focused on detecting potential issues. Not because there is real danger, but because it has been told to stay vigilant. This is how calm slowly turns into anxiety. Not through external events, but through internal interpretation and repetition. The solution is not to force yourself to relax, because forced relaxation is still resistance, and resistance keeps the pattern alive. The shift begins with understanding, recognizing that this feeling is not a warning signal, but a habit, a learned response that no longer matches your current reality. Your mind is still operating based on old patterns, expecting something to go wrong because that is what it is used to. Once you see that clearly, something changes. Not instantly, but gradually. As you begin to separate the feeling from the story attached to it. You notice the anxiety without immediately trying to explain it, without turning it into a problem that needs solving. Instead of asking what is wrong, you start observing what is present. The tension, the restlessness, the unease, all existing without a clear cause. And in that observation, something important happens. The automatic loop begins to weaken. You stop reacting in the same way. You pause instead of analyzing. You allow instead of resisting. And you give the feeling space without giving it meaning. This is not passive, it is intentional, and it is what allows your system to recalibrate. You are teaching your mind that calm is not something to question, but something to experience, something that does not require action or interpretation. And that shift takes time, because familiarity is built through repetition, not force. The more you experience calm without attaching anxiety to it, the more your baseline begins to change, slowly moving from tension to neutrality, and eventually to comfort. But this only happens if you stop interrupting the process with overanalysis. Every time you turn calm into a problem, your mind reinforces the association between stillness and uncertainty, keeping the pattern active. Breaking that pattern requires less doing and more awareness, less control and more observation. It means allowing calm to exist, without needing to define it, fix it, or question it, even when it feels unfamiliar. That discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something is changing. And change, especially internal change, often feels unstable before it feels natural, because it challenges what your system has been used to for a long time. But if you stay with it, without reacting, without feeding the old pattern, it begins to settle. Your mind adapts, just like it adapted to stress before. But this time, it adapts to calm, to stillness, to a state that no longer requires constant vigilance. And as that happens, the anxiety fades, not because you forced it away, but because it is no longer needed. This is the shift most people never reach, because they spend their time trying to remove anxiety without understanding why it exists in moments where nothing is wrong. They treat it as a malfunction instead of recognizing it as a pattern that can be outgrown. Once you understand the pattern, you stop being controlled by it, because you no longer mistake it for reality. You see it as a leftover response from a different version of your life, a system that learned to expect instability and now needs time to adjust. That adjustment is not immediate, and it is not always comfortable, but it is possible, and it happens naturally when you stop interfering with it. There is nothing wrong, even if it feels like there is, and your mind will take time to catch up to that truth, but it will, if you let it. If this felt familiar, it's not a random. There's a pattern behind it, and once you start seeing it, you won't unsee it.